There's a certain magic to hunting trips that only those who've experienced them truly understand. The world feels different before dawn, when the air is crisp and the forest is still, every sound amplified in the quiet. You step out into the woods with friends or family, boots crunching on frost, breath clouding in the early light. There's a sense of camaraderie, of tradition, and of anticipation, the thrill of the chase, the hope of a story to tell when you return home. For many, these moments are a rite of passage, a way to connect with nature and with each other. But the wilderness holds secrets, and not all of them are friendly. The same trees that offer shelter can also hide danger. The silence that feels peaceful at sunrise can turn suffocating by nightfall. Out there, miles from help, you realize how small you really are and how quickly things can change. Most hunters expect to be the ones in control, the ones doing the stalking. But what if the thing you're hunting isn't the only thing out there? What if, in the heart of the woods, you're not alone? Tonight, you'll hear 3 true stories that will make you rethink your next trip into the wild. These aren't just tales of bad luck or close calls. They're accounts of hunts that turned into nightmares, of people who went into the woods and came back changed, or didn't come back at all. Most hunters never expect to become the hunted. These stories will make you question what's really waiting in the trees. Every fall, a group of lifelong friends made the same pilgrimage to the vast pine forests of northern Minnesota. It was a tradition that stretched back to their teenage years. Just 4 men, a battered old truck, and a week spent tracking deer through endless green. The woods were familiar, almost comforting, and the men knew every trail, every creek, every stand of trees that might hide a buck. They set up camp in a clearing, built a fire, and spent their first night swapping stories under a sky thick with stars. The first few days passed in a blur of laughter and routine. They rose before dawn, split up to cover more ground, and regrouped at midday to compare notes and share sandwiches. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and the distant crack of branches. But on the 3rd morning, something felt off. The air was colder, the woods quieter. Even the birds seemed to have vanished. It was Tom who first mentioned the strange noises. He said he'd heard footsteps behind him, too heavy to be a deer, too slow to be a coyote. The others teased him, blaming his imagination or maybe too much coffee. But that afternoon, as they tracked a set of fresh prints through a patch of soft earth, they found something that made them all uneasy. The tracks were human but barefoot, and they wandered in circles, crisscrossing their own path again and again. That night, the group sat closer to the fire, their laughter forced. The woods pressed in around them, the darkness deeper than usual. Sometime after midnight, a distant scream echoed through the trees, high, sharp, and cut off too quickly. The men froze, listening, but the sound didn't come again. They convinced themselves it was a fox or an owl, but no one slept well. The next morning, Mark was gone. His sleeping bag was empty, his boots missing, but his rifle and jacket were still by the fire. The men searched the camp, calling his name, but there was no answer. They fanned out through the woods, following the faint trail of footprints that led away from camp. The tracks twisted through the pines, doubling back on themselves, sometimes disappearing altogether. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. As dusk fell, they found a clearing where the pine needles had been swept into a perfect circle. In the center was Mark's hat, placed neatly on the ground. There were no other signs, no blood, no struggle, just the hat and the silence of the forest. The men called the authorities, and a search party combed the woods for days, but Mark was never found. The friends returned home, haunted by what they'd seen. Some said Mark must have gotten lost, disoriented in the endless trees. Others whispered about the barefoot tracks, about the scream in the night, about the circle in the clearing. The woods, once a place of comfort, now felt like a living thing watching, waiting. Years later, one of the men returned to the same spot, hoping for closure. He found the clearing unchanged, the pine needles still swept into a circle, as if someone or something was keeping it that way. He left without looking back. What they found in the pines was never explained, and some say the woods are still watching. For those who were there, The memory of that trip is a reminder that in the heart of the forest, you're never truly alone. The wilderness has a way of making us feel invincible. Out there, surrounded by towering trees and endless sky, it's easy to believe you're in control. You have your gear, your experience, your friends by your side. But the truth is, nature doesn't care how prepared you are. Every year, hundreds of hunters go missing or suffer accidents in the wild. Some are found, but many simply vanish, leaving behind only questions and empty campsites. There's a comfort in routine, in the familiar rituals of a hunting trip. But that comfort can be dangerous, lulling even the most seasoned outdoorsmen into letting their guard down. A single misstep, a moment of distraction, and the woods can swallow you whole. The line between safety and danger is thinner than you think, and sometimes it's only after something goes wrong that you realize how vulnerable you really are. If you thought the first story was unsettling, the next one will make you fear the dark. Most people never realize how quickly the woods can turn against you. The next story is a chilling reminder that sometimes it's not just the animals you need to watch out for. It's the things you can't explain. The eyes you feel on you when you're sure you're alone. Jake had always loved the solitude of hunting alone. For him, the quiet of the forest was a kind of therapy, a place to clear his mind and test his skills without distraction. He set out before dawn, hiking deep into the Appalachian woods with only his rifle, a backpack, and the promise of a weekend away from the noise of everyday life. The first day was uneventful, filled with the usual signs of wildlife and the gentle hush of wind through the trees. As dusk settled, Jake made camp beside a small creek, cooked a simple meal, and watched the stars emerge through the canopy. That night, as he lay in his tent, Jake heard something moving just beyond the firelight. At first, he thought it was a deer or maybe a raccoon, but the footsteps were too heavy, too deliberate. He called out, shining his flashlight into the darkness, but saw nothing. The sound stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed in on all sides. Jake tried to sleep, telling himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling of being watched lingered long after the noises faded. The next morning, Jake found strange tracks circling his camp. They were large, almost human, but with an odd, elongated shape. He snapped a photo, planning to show his friends back home, and tried to shake off the unease. The day passed quietly, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, the woods seemed to change. Shadows stretched longer, and every sound felt amplified. Jake built his fire higher, keeping his rifle close. As darkness fell, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time, almost suffocating. Jake scanned the tree line, his flashlight catching only glimpses of movement. Then, just beyond the reach of the light, he saw them. Two glowing eyes, low to the ground, unblinking and fixed on his camp. He shouted, fired a warning shot, but the eyes didn't flinch. They simply vanished, swallowed by the night. Jake barely slept, every rustle and snap outside his tent setting his nerves on edge. At dawn, he found more tracks, closer this time, as if whatever was out there had crept right up to his camp while he slept. He packed up quickly, deciding to cut his trip short. As he hiked back toward his truck, the woods felt different, quieter, heavier, as if something was following just out of sight. Halfway to the trailhead, Jake heard footsteps behind him, matching his pace. He spun around, but the path was empty. He hurried on, heart pounding, refusing to look back. When he finally reached his truck, he found a single muddy handprint smeared across the driver's side window. Jake drove home without stopping, the sense of being watched lingering long after he left the woods behind. He showed the photos of the tracks to local hunters, but no one could identify them. Some said it was a bear, others joked about Bigfoot, but Jake knew what he felt that night. He never hunted alone again. To this day, no one knows what was out there, or if it's still waiting for its next victim. Jake's story is a warning to anyone who thinks they're alone in the wild. Sometimes, the eyes in the dark are real, and sometimes, they're watching you. If you've ever spent a night in the woods, you know the feeling, the way darkness seems to swallow everything, the way every sound feels amplified, the way your imagination starts to fill in the gaps. Most hunters have a story about something strange they've seen or heard. A moment when the forest felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or maybe it was something you were never meant to see. It's easy to forget how quickly the wild can turn on you. One moment you're enjoying the peace and quiet, the next you're questioning every shadow, every snap of a twig. The stories you've heard so far are reminders that the line between safety and danger is razor thin, and that sometimes the things that scare us most are the ones we can't explain. The last story is the most disturbing, because sometimes the real danger isn't what's outside, but what's already inside. The next story will make you think twice about seeking shelter in the woods. Most people believe a cabin means safety, but as you'll see, that's not always the case. A sudden storm forced brothers Matt and Eric to abandon their hunt and seek shelter deep in the mountains. They'd heard about an old logging cabin nearby, just 4 walls and a roof, but better than braving the downpour in the open. By the time they reached it, the rain was coming down in sheets, thunder rumbling through the trees. The cabin looked abandoned, its windows dark and its door hanging crooked, but inside it was dry and surprisingly tidy. A pile of firewood sat by the stove, and a faded blanket was folded neatly on a cot. Relieved, the brothers set up their gear and started a fire. As the wind howled outside, they joked about ghost stories and the luck of finding shelter just in time. But as the night wore on, small details began to unsettle them. There were muddy footprints on the floor, fresh, not theirs. A mug of coffee, still warm, sat on the table. The firewood looked recently chopped, and a hunting knife was stuck in the wall above the cot, its blade gleaming in the firelight. Matt tried to laugh it off, but Eric grew quiet, his eyes darting to the door every time the wind rattled it. They decided to stay awake in shifts, just in case. Around midnight, Eric nudged Matt awake, whispering that he'd heard footsteps outside. They listened, breath held, as slow, deliberate steps circled the cabin. The footsteps stopped at the door, then moved to the window. A shadow passed across the glass, pausing as if watching them. The brothers sat in silence, rifles in hand, until the footsteps faded into the storm. They waited, nerves frayed, until dawn finally broke. When they stepped outside, they found a set of muddy footprints leading away from the cabin, bare feet, heading into the woods. On the door, scratched deep into the wood, were the words, "Not your home." They packed up and left without looking back, hearts pounding, the sense of being watched never leaving them. Later, they learned that the cabin had a reputation among local hunters. Some said it was haunted, others claimed a hermit lived there, driving off anyone who trespassed. No one knew for sure, but everyone agreed on one thing: you didn't stay in that cabin if you could help it. The truth about the cabin was never discovered, and some say it's still waiting for its next visitors. For Matt and Eric, the memory of that night is a chilling reminder that in the wild, shelter doesn't always mean safety, and sometimes the scariest thing in the woods is what's already inside. The wilderness is a place of beauty and adventure, but it's also a place where the unknown waits just beyond the next tree. The stories you've heard tonight are proof that even the most experienced hunters can find themselves outmatched by the secrets the woods keep. A friend vanishes without a trace, eyes watch from the darkness, and a cabin meant for shelter becomes a place of fear. These aren't just cautionary tales. They're reminders that nature doesn't play by our rules. How many hunters never make it home? How many stories are left untold, lost in the silence of the forest? Most people head into the wild expecting to return with memories and trophies, never imagining they might become part of a story whispered around the next campfire. There are even more terrifying hunting stories out there, some too disturbing to share. Will you ever feel safe in the woods again?